Gracious God, I just ask that the words that I say lift up those that are in trouble, those that are looking for change, those that are needing a word right now. I just ask that you strengthen not only what I say, but all of us as we sit, as we reflect, as we lift up these wonderful words. In your name we pray. Amen. Now let me share with you a story. There was a town, a little small town, that only had one little church in it, and a nightclub opened up. And so that little church decided to do something about that nightclub that was just down the street. And so they held an all-night vigil to pray that God would burn that nightclub to the ground. And after the vigil was done, they came outside and there was a storm. And within minutes, a lightning strike hit that nightclub and did indeed burn it down. And the owner of the nightclub sued the church. And the church denied responsibility. And as the court case went forward, the judge said, it seems that wherever the guilt may lie, the nightclub owner believes in the power of prayer, but the church does not. Last week, I shared with you our plan for this month. Now, let me correct that. My plan for the church. This month is my I Have a Dream speech for the church. I want to create a place where certain things happen, where certain events take place. And so last week we focused on the Ghanaian bird called Sankofa. This bird is more like a symbol of where the feet were firmly planted forward, but as you know, the beak is going back, reaching back for a pebble. It's a great symbol for the discussion on the vision of the church or where I'd like to see us go. So I'd like you to pull out your cards, and we did this last week. And so those of you that don't have your cards, we've got the ushers are going to be handing out the cards with you. And I want you to use these cards to write down your vision of the church, your dream for this place. And so for those of you that were here last week, remember with the directions, write your name on the front of the card. And the reason why is that you can have it here with you. Or if you take it home, just make sure you bring it back with you. And then when you get the card, right at the top of the card, I have a dream. I have a dream. So as the ushers are handing this out, and don't worry, you'll have plenty of opportunity to write down the responses here. Let me share with you what I wrote last week. I have a dream. I want to create a place where change can happen, where we are allowed to think outside the box. This week, our vision is helped with another visual from Ghana. In fact, I have two of them here. And so I know that many of you are not able to see all the way up here. So let me share with you the two items that we have. This first one was given to us by the Akashi family. And so when we first went, it was actually, him and his family purchased these praying hands for all of us that went the first time. And on the front it says, pray without ceasing. And on the back it says, from Reverend Akashi and family. And then the second item that you'll see up there is, I actually purchased this the first year. And when I came back, we had given it as a gift to one of Sarah's coworkers. And we liked this item so much that when I went the following year, I wanted to buy another. And I made sure it was bigger this time. So that's what we have here. And so as you're looking at these items, it is pretty apparent that it has to do with prayer. So right now, what we're going to do is we're going to learn an Akan word for prayer. Akan is the predominant language in Ghana. And in fact, when Godson was here preaching, there was another man also from Ghana. His name is Solomon. He works at the hospital and lives here in the valley. And I actually heard them speaking to each other in Akan. And so the word that we're going to learn is Mpaebo. So everyone say that with me. Mpaebo. Mpaebo. It literally translates as prayer. So let me share with you a story. It's a story about prayer. But in the story, you're going to notice that prayer is never mentioned. It goes like this. The scoutmaster and the young tenderfoot scout were walking along a path in the wood, and on the side of the path was a large rock. The boy looked at the rock and thought about it a little. Then he asked his scoutmaster, "Do you think if I use all my strength, I could move that rock?" And the scoutmaster thought for a moment and said, "I think if you use all your strength, you can do it." That was all the young scout needed. He ran over to the rock and he began to push and he pushed and he pushed, but that rock would not budge. After a while, the scout sat down on the ground. He felt betrayed. "You were wrong," he told the scoutmaster. "I can't do it." And that man, who was truly a leader of young men, said gently, "You can do it. You just didn't use all of your strength." And that young tenderfoot scout looked at me and says, "What do you mean?" And the older scoutmaster says, "You didn't ask me to help." I love that illustration. It provides us with a really good example of what prayer means. We can't do it all alone. We can think we can. We can try. We have attempted to do it all ourselves. But prayer is that ideal example of us asking for help. Now, do you remember something that we did last week? We kind of turned things into an I statement, an I phraseology. So I'm going to do that right now. I can't do it all alone. I can think I can. I can try. I have attempted to do it all myself, but prayer is that ideal example of me asking for help. Now, why is this important? Well, I think it will be helpful for us to understand the perspective of the passage that Sandy is going to read for us right now from the book of Jeremiah.
Okay. And it's chapter 29, verse 1, and then I'm going to read 4 through 7. I wrote a letter to the priests, the prophets, the leaders of the people, and to all the others whom Nebuchadnezzar had taken away as prisoners from Jerusalem to Babylon. The Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says to all those people whom he allowed Nebuchadnezzar to take away as prisoners from Jerusalem to Babylon, build houses and settle down, plant gardens and eat what you grow, marry and have children. Then let your children get married so that they also may have children. You must increase in numbers and not decrease. Work for the good of the cities where I have made you go as prisoners. Pray to me on their behalf, because if they are prosperous, you will be prosperous too. Okay. May God add his blessings to the reading.
Thank you, Sandy. Now, this passage is an obvious continuation of what we've been learning these past couple weeks. So let's have a little recap. Jeremiah, remember, buys this property, and as I told you, I said it was a really bad investment. Because at that time, it looked like that Israel was going to be defeated. And that everyone was going to be sent to exile, and the land would be made desolate, and no one would be there to work it or especially to buy the land. So then last week, we had this mournful passage out of Lamentations. And we learned that indeed Jerusalem does fall. And the future of Israel, including that property that Jeremiah bought, is now in doubt. And that set things up for the passage that Sandy just read to us. Jeremiah is left behind in Israel, and he is writing a letter to the captives in Babylon. And he says, do not fight. Do not resist. Instead, get comfortable. Go ahead and marry. Invest into the area because you're going to be there a long time. In essence, Jeremiah is teaching us, me, a valuable lesson on prayer. I can't do it all alone. I can think I can. I can try. I have attempted to do it all myself. But prayer is that ideal example of me asking for help. So that leads me to add something to my vision card. So, I have a dream. want to create a place where money is not a worry. Now, the reason that I put this into my statement here, the reason that this is on my vision card, is you see, I am a warrior. Not a warrior, I'm a worrier. And in fact, if there was a group called Warriors Anonymous, I would be there every week saying, "Hi, I'm Seth, I'm a warrior." And I would list all the things that I worry about. Now, I realize that as you look at this list, I can't control any of these things. For example, I worry about my children. I worry about their future. I worry about their happiness. I worry about the Cornhuskers. I really worry about the Cornhuskers. I worry about my dog's arthritis. I worry about the day that we're going to have to put her to sleep. I've got some other things I worry about as well. I worry that when I turn on my computer in the morning, all my files will be wiped out. I worry that I'm going to overcook the turkey on Thanksgiving. And I worry that I'm going to get bit by a spider again on my neck. It happened once, it's probably going to happen again. Now, I have no control over these things. I realize that. And because of that, these are worries that are minor, and I don't lose sleep over it. Well, except that Cornhusker game, I kind of lost sleep over that. But the things that I do worry about, and that I do lose sleep on, are financial. I worry about affording college for all of my daughters here in a few years when they're all in college. I worry about the maintenance costs of my house. I worry if I'll have enough for retirement. I worry about the finances of this church. I worry if we'll be able to pay all of our bills. I worry if we'll be able to make payroll every month. And I worry about our church's endowment. Now, maybe it's because I'm a nerd. That's something that I provide proudly from Dave Ramsey. And there's one lesson that I remember well. And he says that 50% of all Americans worry about money and lose sleep over it. And he also says that 70% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. And Dave Ramsey's a bit worried about that 20% gap in there. So I have a dream. I want to create a place where money is not a worry. Now, this is not a message on the gospel of prosperity. Some of you have heard about this. These are churches where all the prayers and all the sermons and all the actions are done with this belief that God is going to bless us to be rich or going to get rich. And believe me, the gospel of prosperity is alive and well in Ghana. Godson talked at length about this. Now let me give you a little context about Ghana. Ghana is an African country that's doing okay financially, especially in comparison to other African countries. But okay there is just above the poverty level here. So here you have this country where this message is that is coming out from these churches. You come here, you pray here, you give your hard-earned salaries here, and God will double and triple your bank account. And it is a message that really resonates. Godson says that he preaches about the love and acceptance of Jesus Christ, and when the church next door has a simple message of, "We'll make you rich," he really struggles to get through. That is not my dream. I want to create a place where we do not worry about money. And yes, I'm using "we" here because I'm extending that to the church. So I'm going to do something that only I can do. Only I can have an I statement. I cannot have an I statement for you. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to stand before you, before the Mpaebo, the prayer items, and I want to create a place where I do not worry about money. Now you have to realize this is a statement coming from a chronic warrior. How does someone like myself who worries about my own finances stand before you with such a pledge? Well, I go back to that statement of what prayer means. I can't do it all alone. I can think I can. I can try. I have attempted to do it all myself, but prayer is that ideal example of me asking for help. Recently, I came across something author and pastor Lewis Smedes once wrote. He put the matter quite plainly. He writes, "I want to say to you that if you have a ship, you will not desert. If you have people you will not forsake, if you have causes you will not abandon, then you are like God. When a person makes a promise, she reaches out into an unpredictable future and makes one thing predictable. She will be there even when being there costs her more than she wants to pay. When a person makes a promise, he stretches himself out into circumstances that no one can control and controls at least one thing. He will be there no matter what the circumstances turn out to be. With one simple word of promise, a person creates an island of certainty in a sea of uncertainty. I love that. What is a promise? Certainty in a time of uncertainty. And because I wrote thinking out that I like to think outside the box, I'm going to stretch this to say that a promise really is a belief that is something that hasn't happened yet. I mean, just think of the promises that we have made in our life. I promise to be faithful to you. How many of us have said that in a wedding vow? Or I promise to raise you well. We said that to our children. I promise to treat you as a good boss. How many of us said that to an employee? Or I promise to do my job. We've said that to a boss. Or I promise to be your friend. Now, here's the thing about promises. You cannot see the end. You just have to believe in the promise. So let's go back to this scripture that Sandy read. Jeremiah is saying, you are in it for the long haul. You may not see the results. Your return to Israel may not happen for several generations, but I promise it will happen. If that reminds you of the Exodus story, you are correct. When the Israelites left Egypt, they were promised that they would get to the promised land. But there's a problem. In the wilderness, they were in the wilderness for 40 years. And the average lifespan of a human at that time was 33. Many did not see the fulfillment of the promised land. And that includes Moses himself, who died just shy of the promised land. Now, just because those who started out didn't reach their destination does not mean that they stopped. It doesn't even mean failure. Those of us that have read that story know how things turned out. Joshua took over. He took the next generation into the promised land. So I want to focus on this word promise for a second, especially when it comes to prayer. I'm reminded of my time when I worked with Brian Coates. Brian, I was his associate pastor for 3 years, and he taught me a lot, but especially when it came to prayer. He taught me that when he had more to do, when he had more plates spinning in the air, when he had more appointments on his calendar than he knew that he could get done, he would spend longer in prayer. Now, to me, that didn't make sense. I always believed that when you had more to do, you just worried more. But not Brian. He would take his calendar and his worry and his concern for finances to prayer. In her book, God Knows My Heart, journalist Christine Wicker interviewed a man by the name of Vincent Hall. Mr. Hall is known throughout Dallas for two things. One, he is the chair of one of the largest credit unions in the town. And two, he's a committed Christian. And every weekend, Mr. Hall marches through downtown Dallas protesting racism and the evils of society. And he knows that few businessmen of his stature are so open about their faith. And he knows that by opening himself up, he is opening himself up to ridicule in his community. But he can't back down. And the reason he can't or he won't is because of a particular sermon that changed his life. Many years ago, Mr. Hall's pastor preached on 3 different kinds of believers. If, because, and regardless. An if believer follows God if he receives blessings and rewards in return. He waits to see what God will do first, then decides whether to respond in obedience. And the pastor said that Jacob is a good example of an if believer. A good example of a because believer is King David. A because believer follows God because God blesses and rewards him. He has seen the connection between his obedience and God's blessing, and he wants to keep it going. But there's a third kind of believer. said the pastor. Excuse me, this is the regardless believer. A regardless believer loves God no matter whether he ever receives any blessings or rewards in return. Job, the man whose very name is synonymous with suffering, was a regardless believer. A regardless believer loves God despite his circumstances, in spite of his hardships. On the day he heard that sermon, Mr. Hall devoted himself to being a regardless believer for the rest of his life. An if believer. Now, doesn't that sound like those who attend the Gospel of Prosperity churches in Ghana and here in America? A prayer might sound something like this. God, if I turn over my wallet, if I turn over my finances, if I turn over my will to you, then I know blessings will come in my pocketbook. A because believer sounds a lot like my life as a worrier. It reminds me of the plaque on my mom's wall. I know worry works. 90% of what I worry about never happens. And my prayer sounds something like this. God, because I worry about finances, and because I stay awake all night, because I can't control what's going to happen, I know at least I'm doing something. I'm worrying, and because of that, God, I believe you'll help me. So here's my dream. I want to create a place where money is not a worry. And now my prayer looks like this. God, I can't do it all alone. I can think I can. I can try. I have attempted to do it all myself. But prayer is that ideal example of me asking you for help. I'm going to turn it over to God. And isn't that the way it should be? Isn't that what a promise is? I cannot tell you what tomorrow's going to bring. I don't know if I'm going to be here next year or 5 years or 10 years from down the road. I don't know if this church is going to be here next year or 5 years or 10 years down the road. But regardless of what takes place in the future, my dream is to turn it over to God. Does that mean that I'm going to stop worrying? Probably not. But I'm going to change my prayer. And my prayer, or Mpaebo, means that I'm going to ask God to help me in everything I do. It's the only way to move forward. With my feet firmly planted, looking into the future, and reminding me of what the church has done for me today. Regardless of what happens. This is my dream. Amen. I want to thank the ushers.